while sharing inspiring examples of successful impact giving initiatives from across the UNDP network. In today's session, we will explore an area that is fundamental to fundraising online and offline, and when done well, allows donors to find purpose and connection with the work that we do. It can turn an idea that is a difficult one to communicate into one that is memorable and easy to share. Joining us today are two advanced storytellers in the impact giving space, Dan Reed of Media Cause and Ana Lucia Orozco of the Biodiversity Finance Initiative, or BIOFIN, who will answer the question, what makes a story great and what is needed to inspire action? And will bring their unique perspectives to bear on this question. But first, over to Claudia Poclava to introduce herself and today's speakers.
Thank you, Wayne, and hi, everyone. My name is Claudia Poclava. I'm part of the Innovative Digital Partnerships at Vera headquarters, and together with Svetlana Baeva, we work together on putting these digital fundraising meetups. And let me first introduce our today's speakers. First, we're going to have Dan Reed. Dan Reed is the Senior Director of Digital Fundraising at Media Cause. Media Cause is a mission-driven marketing and creative agency that helps nonprofits grow and accelerate their impact. He spent 7 years at the Smithsonian Institution managing the digital components of the Friends of the Smithsonian Direct Response Program. Also, Dan worked in the World Food Program, building out their digital fundraising program from the ground up and developing an award-winning monthly donor program over the course of 3 years. In February 2021, Dan earned his certificate fundraising executive designation from the CFRE International. Then our second speaker of the day is Ana Lucia Rubio from BIOFIN. Ana Lucia Rubio is the Environmental Finance Analyst for the Latin American and the Caribbean BIOFIN and former BIOFIN Costa Rica coordinator. These speakers are going to present their expertise in storytelling. First, we're going to hear Dan, and then after, we're going to hear about Ana Lucia's crowdfunding campaign. And after that, we're going to have a Q&A of 15 minutes. The floor is yours, Dan.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us from Media Cause here today. I'm excited to talk to you about this subject. So, firstly, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'll talk a little bit about what is constituent cultivation and stewardship and what we mean by it tactically. And then I'll share with you all a case study about this subject for an environmental organization called Ceres. And then, as mentioned earlier, I was at World Food Program USA, so I'll talk a little bit about that to close, and then we'll have more going forward. So let me get right into it. So yeah, briefly about myself, I'm from Chicago, Illinois. I work in Washington, D.C. at Media Cause. I've been in digital fundraising for 15 years, and I spent a lot of time on cultivation, stewardship, particularly at the Smithsonian and World Food Program USA. So that's what we'll talk mostly about today. So firstly, cultivation and stewardship, let's define. So for email cultivation for nonprofits, for groups like yours, refers to the process of nurturing and developing relationships with supporters, donors, and potential donors through strategic email communication. It involves using email campaigns to engage, educate, and inspire people to take action or contribute to your cause. Effective email cultivation helps to build a strong donor base, increase the number of donations, and foster long-term engagement and loyalty among your donor base. So for UNDP, this essentially comes down to using cultivation, using email specifically, to inform, educate, excite, express gratitude, instill confidence, instill hope and concern around the key components of your work, which would be poverty, governance, resilience, environment, energy, and gender. So essentially, every time you do a cultivation or stewardship message, you would do so around the key components of your work, trying to evoke these types of emotions around informing people about what's at stake or who's involved, educating people about the mechanics of what goes into the work that you're doing, getting people excited about what you're trying to accomplish. And then I like, as a sort of evergreen notion, to always be expressing gratitude, and similarly instilling confidence in UNDP as an organization that is a wise choice for a philanthropic support. And of course, to really instill hope and concern, right? To sort of tell that dual natured story of the problem that you're trying to solve. There will be wins, there'll be setbacks, and it's important to present all of that in the overarching story of what you're trying to tell. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about what that looked like in manifest, in market, for a group called Ceres. Ceres is a environmental organization, and they're working across different business sectors to build leadership and drive climate solutions through the economy. So before I even start, I can tell you that we would describe this as, this is a wonky mission. And wonky missions are usually good. Wonky missions usually means there's a lot of smarts behind them. But practically speaking, that means you have to do it. You have to go a little bit further to tell the story because it's a little bit more complex. So that was generally kind of our overarching challenge, where they're doing really smart work trying to bring corporate and economic forces to bear positively for the environment. And then that in of itself is just a little bit of a complicated thing to tell, that kind of a story. So where we sort of dug in on it was essentially talking about the slow yet always deliberate actions that Ceres is taking through either companies working with governments and other stakeholders, and then also connecting those dots around that action to, at this moment in time, was the COVID-19 pandemic. So within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, it was an opportune moment, essentially, for a group like Ceres to tell a story about interconnectivity, complexity, and the knock-on effects of things, because we were all immersed in it immediately for a number of years, right? So, like, essentially, the social and cultural context provided us an inroad into talking about their mission. So a couple things to point out. So what we did, the one thing to talk about is sort of like what I would describe as the subtext. In Ceres' case, they do a lot of work where it's like bringing people into a webinar or an event, people who are decision makers in key companies, and essentially bring them around to what Ceres is trying to accomplish. But the subtext, I would say, is that Ceres is moving the right people to the right place and having the right conversations in the right conference rooms, if you will, right? So that's the subtext that's presented when one sees an advertisement, for example, in this case, of a Berkeley ESG course and a promotion partnership there. So that's the one side of it, is the subtext that you can provide when you put anything into market, either email or in an ad unit like this, where you can really, like I say, provide the subtext for what your organization is doing, as well as accomplish the practical things that the ad unit might be trying to accomplish. The other thing to consider was where we really thought a lot about the notion of time and when people were. So in the context of fundraising, I think this is really important to try and understand the cultural and societal moment that a person might find themselves when your message is received. And so we made just, I thought, good use of that around things like Giving Tuesday, things like Earth Day, and the example of an environmental like Ceres. So that was a key part of how we thought and how we do think about cultivation, stewardship, and storytelling, is really thinking about when someone might be and what practical context might need to be provided because of when they are. So in real terms, to kind of look under the hood here, so this is an example, and I'm not sure if I'm able to, it's sort of interactive. I'll try and see if we can do this quick quiz. So what we did do for series was they had a programmatic initiative called their Series Roadmap 2030, which broke down a 10-year action plan for corporations, investors, on what needs to be done to move the environment forward and safely. Obviously, that's a complex idea. So what we did was kind of flip that around and decided to ask people to test their own climate IQ and incentivized it, I think, critically here, to unlock $1. So essentially the user is presented with an incentive to test themselves about the climate, what they think they know about it, and unlock $1 to advance solutions for it. And so this is the type of question. So blank emissions is defined as a balance between greenhouse gas emissions produced from factories, vehicles, power plants, and those reduced and removed from the atmosphere. Can you fill in the blank? Blank emissions. Maybe anyone want to drop this into the chat if they can? What do you think the answer is? Tick tock. I'll go right through. It's net zero. So this is the correct answer, and I think it's what I'm going to show you the next one here. So obviously, the person wants to get a correct answer, net zero, but then we provide the additional context around what net zero and what that would mean in the context of the Series Roadmap 2030. And so it gets right into specifics around reducing greenhouse gas emissions, removing carbon across the value chain, optimize energy usage, transition to renewable energy. So getting into those specifics around that one question. So here's another question. Again, it has the topical context. 2 months into the COVID-19 pandemic, blank number of companies and investors joined Series in the largest business-led lawmaker education advocacy day in U.S. history, advocating for pandemic recovery that is both climate smart and just. So obviously, in this one, we present a list of numbers that is really designed to show the breadth of Series' reach, right? So the idea being is like we want to be able to ask a question that makes a person think about essentially the level of impact that Series has in a number form. And so when someone answers the wrong question, we obviously present a different answer, right? So you didn't get it right, but mention that it's obviously a little bit higher. And I think for a question like this, to double back, 330 was the highest number that we presented, right? So we're not really undercutting the impact at all when we present the case, and it still feels like it's a large number. And so those kinds of quizzes, engagements, that type of storytelling for Series, at the end of the day, we think did a good job. We had a 32% decrease in the cost per lead, the 13% increase in year-over-year average donor gift, and then a 24% increase in the average website gift. So it was at the end of the day, a 30% increase in overall revenue for them in that year, and I think a critical piece of that. So moving on, I wanted to sort of close my chat about my time at World Food Program USA, which I thought might be a little bit more apt for you all and how you might think about yourselves in the UN system, and hopefully some familiar ideas and notions that are coming in this. So during my time at WFP USA, there was a few things happening globally. You had the Syrian civil war, the crisis still going on in Yemen, the South Sudan famine, the Rohingya crisis. You had a number of different hurricanes and droughts that were just the regular clip of the international need around hunger. So you had that sort of all these different sort of things, this contextual moments that were happening for people. So in this one, this is kind of I wanted to show an outline of how we wrote these different emails. So the way we planned them out was a few different things, and it looked a lot like kind of what questions we wanted it to answer or what feelings we wanted the reader to have. So that was kind of the initial pass at how we went about writing these. So We outlined a designation. So UNR is unrestricted. So we have that. That's a revenue goal. And I should back up and add around the revenue importance of cultivation and stewardship as a line item. Our email cultivation accounted for around $200,000 in annual revenue, which was a pretty sizable portion relative to our overall several $1 million number. So it was a huge, I think, critical piece of not only as a direct revenue line, but also as a supportive communique that's designed to lift the other efforts. So in this message, the goal was to drive people to our airdrop landing page. So we were talking about kind of defining what is famine. For people, there hadn't been a famine in the world for a number of years. And so at that time, it was essentially pretty novel. And we thought it was a good idea to essentially define the word famine, what we mean by it, technical term, although it's used sort of loosely as if it's, if it's not a very specific thing. So it's one of those things that we wanted to talk about and really establish what that meant. And then so we wanted to talk about the causes of famine. In this instance, it was conflict in South Sudan. And then we wanted to sort of talk about the notion to connect conflict to WFP's scale of operations, and noting that critically and frankly, sadly, that 80% of the operations at the time were around man-made conflict disasters. And then we wanted to talk about essentially, and this is where the cultivation pieces comes in. So we educated people around the context of why we're having to be there in the first place and what is practically happening. And then after that, talk to them about, why does WFP do airdrops? Like, what is the why? What is the why behind it? And go into, well, the practical reasons of these are hard to reach places. These are conflict zones. Like, these are places that are incredibly dangerous. And then also go into what goes into the practicals of executing an airdrop, because executing airdrop, is it's very complex work. There's a lot that goes into that, and they do a number of them a day. I think they were doing 8 a day at the time. So it's a super complex operation, and has a lot of. It's essentially very ripe for storytelling, because it is so massive in scale, and essentially breathtaking as far as like what is happening when you see, especially when you can add images to it and talk about, the hangar coming down and the food actually coming down and with parachutes on it. And then we go through practically what the assets might be in order to execute such a message, which is the images, email copy, social copy. So this is really what's going to look like every single start of our message. Here's one that's about Plumpy Sup, which I hope might be familiar for you all. But Plumpy Sup is really just this really clever, nutritious food distribution that WFP is about. And so I think in this interest, obviously the goal here is like, how do we how can we present Plumpy Sup in a way that really understands how smart it is, how important it is, and how it really affects people in an immediately meaningful way. So we talk about essentially what it is, what the ingredients are, why it's innovative, and the fact that we were able to treat malnutrition in the home and not necessarily at a clinic or at a shelter. The success rates for children, why does it work, and like how long? But just getting into the specifics of the program delivery itself, and then just really talking about how and where WFP uses that. So at this point, we jotted a note to ourselves. It'd be great to know how many packets WFP delivered last year, which would be a great stat to include. So that set us off onto a email chain to our colleagues in Rome to say, hey, can you help us find this data point so that we can talk about it in this way to our US audience. And then we also talked about things like the hunger season. So, talking about giving context to people around that there's of course, the conflict-driven hunger crisis, but also that the regular seasonal aspects of hunger and how there's a lean season in different parts of the world. And so really talking about that in a way, that is meant to set the stage. We, in this instance, set the stage for our July appeal, which was going to be around nutrition. So we were thinking about essentially cultivation in an earlier part of the period, so like in June or in early July, and then have it connect essentially. And we're laying the groundwork for what we know we'll be talking about, which will be around, we'll have a match appeal around the lean season in July. So really talking about really setting the stage, if you will, for the ask down the road by talking about what exactly is the hunger season. So, what that looks like for a family and like what that looks like in real terms, and really trying to tie, in this instance, a really personal story about the impacts on families, people's moms and dads and kids. And then again, what we need for, the assets to execute on this. So I think I'm going to pause there and hand it over to Ana to talk about her work, and then we'll come back to this Q&A.
Thank you very much, Dan. And it's so nice to see the connections and lessons coming from both your work and what I'm about to try to share with you here.
Thank you a lot, Dan. For the Q&A, we're going to take the last 15 minutes. So everyone, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them also on the chat.
Claudia, can you see my screen? Just checking.
We can, yes.
Great. So I would first like to ask you, what actually moves you? What really turns your interest? For which cause or reason would you be willing to give up your precious time or contribute with your own money? You see, knowing what moves you and empathizing with your audience must be your everyday mantra to build a strong narrative. This is what we followed with Footprints for a Future, Huella del Futuro initiative. And just as an example, for me, it's about what moves me is my family, my community, my region, and the bigger purpose in life, which is working for sustainable development, which we are so privileged to work for. Footprints for a Future, Huella del Futuro, was about accomplishing 60%, contributing to 60% of reforestation in the Costa Rica, about biodiversity restoration goals, but also about changing people's lives now while the pandemic crisis was happening. And there, as a result of this pandemic, there was a loss of revenues and jobs, especially for women in the rural regions of Costa Rica. So this initiative was born with a very high ambition to plant at least 200,000 trees and secure 5 years of maintenance to ensure their survival. That would also generate what we called, because there wasn't a definition for this as that we could find, but we called them green wages. And what we did with the storytelling of this initiative was initially constructed through the concept, but this later evolved and was enhanced throughout its implementation. That we know of, Footprints for a Future is the UNDP crowdfunding campaign that has mobilized more resources so far. And I would love to share with you the efforts around the narrative that I deem were most relevant to engage effectively our supporters, what I like to call our head turners. And I would like to share our main 6 head turners that grasp the attention of sponsors amidst an overwhelming sea of information and initiatives, worries, and tasks that in the end, I can confess, I was so convinced with the narrative and cost that every time I pitched the campaign, I would contribute with acquiring my own footprints. And now I am a small forest patch owner or contributor for my kids and grandchildren. So let's start with head turner number 1. As Dan was saying, reveal with clarity your initiative. What is it for? Why is it relevant? What are the goals? Who can be part and how? And remember that you won't have buy-ins if people are not clear on what the initiative is about and how exactly they can participate. So owning your story and also adapting it to your audience is critical. Managing all the different levels of information can turn out to be overwhelming or hard to follow, depending on the presenter and the audience. So one thing we relied on was to deliver these messages and information through multimedia, short videos, where you can briefly and clearly explain this initiative. And the good thing about it is that videos are useful and worth the investment in developing a great and solid script, because you can repeat and deliver the story over and over through social media, web pages, TV, radio, and others. Something that we used to enhance the storytelling was to select and build the story through the eyes and the stories of 6 women who we called our footprint ambassadors. They represented both the actual institutional and community partners and beneficiaries, such as Andrea, who you can see in the screen, who is a water community manager in northern Costa Rica. Alejandra Murillo, who portrayed our targeted beneficiary and explained in real life how it was so hard for her to get income in the region. She's a woman producer in our targeted communities. Paola, who supports trees nurseries and provides the seedling trees that would be purchased or donated through the initiative. Yareli, who is a very tough park ranger and forest brigader from SINAC, the protected area system in Costa Rica. And Guillermina, who protects patches of forest and has an agroforestry system of pepper and forest species in her family farms. And she's also a beneficiary from the Payment for Ecosystem Services program, which was our ally through the FONAFIFO, the National Forestry Fund. And this brings me to the second head turner, which is to build trust with your narrative. Just think about it. You wouldn't dare to put your credit card information in a web page that you deem might be a scam, right? Graphic design and branding is also critical to have a unified campaign that audience start to identify as one sole initiative, and also helpful to build this trust. Thankfully, we had a brilliant campaign designer within our own team in the BIOFIN UNDP Costa Rica, our very own Diana Garro, graphic designer and social media manager, who was a critical creator and curator for this branding that would review and develop the guidelines so that everyone had the same graphic image. Trust is also to understand who the core partners are included, and this becomes part of your storytelling. For Huella del Futuro, the core partners included the government of Costa Rica, FONAFIFO, as I mentioned, the Ministry of Energy and Environment, who summoned UNDP through BIOFIN initiative, and Fundación Banco Ambiental, our implementing partner. Early adopters included co-financers, the BMU and European Union financed Central American Regional Green Fund project. Our most prominent champion for the initiative was former Vice President Epsi Campbell, whose mission and purpose also aligned and helped construct the narrative. And as you might imagine, also helped us open many doors and liaise with diplomatic community, both within and outside Costa Rica, public national institutions, local governments, who then replicated and opened our doors, more doors to companies from countries that are our partners from the bilateral donors and embassies and associations and others that we could then follow up with all of the task meeting teams. A very crucial and critical way to have a wider outreach is our third head turner, which is amplifying the message to construct and facilitate the storytelling, but building it with and throughout the press, TV channels, radio, and social media. We even tried influencers, which we weren't so successful in our case to get there. But what we did do was, for example, liaise with national programs who made and owned the campaign. Like, for example, this Más que Noticias program who made a whole week of special reports on the initiative and helped extend with more interviews and beneficiaries and partners of our story. They even mentioned students participating in reforestation activities, volunteers and partners were also portrayed in this documentary. So it was very useful and advocating effort. And we also had portrayed some of our actual implementers, like the Women of Sota organization, who has been an executing and benefited organization, where we could deepen and amplify this narrative and storytelling. So we already mentioned in the very beginning what moves us at the individual level, but when it comes to companies or national institutions, there's also a great need to include in your narrative and pitch the tangible and intangible benefits that it will get that the companies or institutions will get for sponsoring your campaign. And this was something that we didn't understand at first, but then going with each company and institution, we had to understand what they wanted to get from each of the packages. So we went on and adopted this. We had first 4 sizes of impact packages, as you can see in this slide, ranging from 1 to 1,000 trees, and all of them had the 5 years of maintenance. But the larger corporate footprints or friendship footprints, when it was a bilateral donor, had more quantifiable benefits and substantial activities. For example, representation of partners in a planting activity and presence on campaign advertising sites, such as train or bus stop MOPIs, as you can see in the image. Transparency and traceability is also critical to interweave and adopt in your storytelling. What we actually did was do the update and make available our campaign, how we were doing with our fundraising. As you can see, we've already almost reached our 2 million donors going on. Donations, sorry, and each of our contributors would be seen as they purchase their footprint. We also have a transparency site where you can actually see how many donors are, more than 306, and where are the trees being planted in real life georeference sites. Who is planting them, like, for example, as I mentioned, the women's organization from Sota, and how many trees do we have so far? We have more than 6 embassies, 2 public institutions, 22 companies, 1,480 individuals, 2,500 clients from companies that also helped us. And we even had, we amplified the results to a nationwide through strategic alliances as well with the National Energy Institute. And those are some pictures, images from our results. And last but not least, so that I won't take much more time, let me please tell you, choose your battles. That is our sixth head turner, and that you should really keep in mind, because crowdfunding is very time and effort consuming, and will work if what you seek is awareness beyond the actual fundraising. But also, don't try every single strategy or every single type of effort in communicating and telling this storytelling, because not all of them will be successful, and it just takes so much time, such as a live sculpture sponsor show that we wanted to enhance for our storytelling, which was a really nice idea, but it was just too much for our core partners and our teams to also be delivering it. What does work is a more effective strategy that we did to construct storylines with our corporate partners, like EPA, a hardware store, who still runs iterative campaigns for Huella through their social responsibility programs. And the one that works even best is the person-to-person storytelling through the cashiers advocate to the customers to adopt a footprint, and will tell them about the experience that they themselves have had planting the trees and providing maintenance. And because in the end, you see the storytellers also become part of the narrative, and setting the example and engaging your storyline to the narrative is also the best way to make it contagious. So thank you very much. Please, as time wouldn't allow me to share the videos and webpage, feel free to explore it. That's www.huelladelfuturo.cr. It's available both in English and Spanish, and it was a great pleasure to be with you. I'll be waiting to see if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ana, and also Dan. Now the floor is open for questions. I don't see any questions on the chat, but I have at least 1 or 2 questions for you too, and maybe like people can start like putting some questions. Dan, first of all, we worked together in the past, and that's how like we ended up like getting to know Meetups and the important work that they do in terms of digital fundraising. But I was wondering, when you started your presentation, if you could share with us, like, what do you think makes a great story, a powerful fundraising story?
It's hard to define. I think there's a few, like I was jotting down notes from Ana, your presentation that I liked, and I think there's probably a immediate and rightful knee-jerk reaction to tell personal stories, like personal about people, names, impact, who they're related to, how cute the kids are, like really touching. And I think I would break that into, there's 2 types of storytelling. There's storytelling that appeals, that tugs on the heartstrings, and there's storytelling that tugs on the brain. And like what I think it's a little bit of heart and mind, and to maybe think about those 2 dynamics working together. And so, for example, the note I jotted down, what I liked was some of the technical storytelling using maps and impact, with showing little dots of scale and where it is in the world that I can think about. There's a place that I know exists there. You know, it really becomes quite holdable, and I think that is really an important way to tell that story, to appeal to the mind, to my brain, right? But then of course there's like the other side of the mix. I really think it's a balance of trying to essentially cover off on both those appeals, the appeal to the heart, the appeal to the mind, and do so in a way that's interesting the entire time. And so like I said, like for me, like I do also, just, and perhaps tangentially, I'll say that I think as technology moves, and like as nonprofits start to deliver very smart programming that might be complex to understand for people, we're going to have to, as storytellers, have to do a better job of like breaking down the difficult concepts for people in a way that is understandable and perhaps quick to understand on a you know, thinking of like an email message or a 5-minute presentation. Like you really got to get in and out with what you want to try and accomplish and what emotions you want to try and evoke. So it's a long way around to say that I think there's a few different types.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And I actually take what you said about like breaking down the concepts, and actually brings me to you, Ana. A question that came up also during your presentation. Could you share with us what were the biggest challenges when you were shaping your story?
Well, I think it's refers to the multi-dimensional part of the story. As Dan was saying, it's about achieving national and international goals, but then how do we appeal to the emotions of this? As Dan was saying, the heart and mind, I like that as well. And how do you go about building the trust? I did mention the benefits, because this was a hard thing to actually get to, because we didn't have this thought before. And institutionals were saying, okay, so how much is it really worth? How much are the advertising and media spots on TV? Is it prime time? Is it not prime time? And because I need to have this result on my board to actually give you the donation. And so these are the other things that you start to get when you're getting when you're trying to have larger sponsors, institutional sponsors. So that was a whole challenge to package and make the alliances and have quantifiable benefits about it. So I think I tried to address all of these challenges through our 6 head turners, but maybe these would be the ones that are not really so straightforward to understand and you get to know them once you start implementing them.
Thank you, Ana. And I see that some questions on the chat. So first we have Patmata Kata. First question is, what could be the most appropriate tool to tell a good success story? Maybe Dan and Ana, you can both give your impressions.
At the risk of coming off as glib, I might say the pen is the most important tool, because at the end of the day, I think you really have to be putting pen on paper quite literally, and then whatever kind of story you're telling. I don't think I'm actually answering the question, forgive me, on what the proper tool you might mean by that. But I feel like generally speaking, I think for whether it comes to producing slide decks, letters, emails, video, you have to be able to write, and you have to be able to put certain concepts in an order in a way that's evoking the right emotion at the right moment in the story. So like that really does take I think like pen to paper tool and like skill to get done. But Ana, what do you think? Perhaps I'm just being glib.
No, what I'm thinking is none and all. There's no single way to go about storytelling. It's a package of all of these tools that we're mentioning and using. It's the web page, it's the videos, it's the narrative, it's the story behind, it's the results of other initiatives that have worked so far and improving them. It's the as I was sharing the personal commitment of a champion that will engage, or the actual story and experience that a beneficiary has had in the program. So there, I don't think there's just one single way to go about the storytelling. It's all of them together, and as I mentioned, and really, please take this advice. Don't try it all. Just go with what works. It's just it can be very overwhelming to try to do everything. So try one thing. If it works, go stick with it and deepen the development of this tool or the other, and go be flexible about it. That would be my advice.
Super important, right? Like not try it all at once. And then actually brings me to the second question from Marisol Jara. What ideas do you have to deliver important messages on adverse country contexts? How to touch sensitive topics on communications? Dan, Ana, over to you.
So I'd say like this is really about audiences and like really having to understand them and what their reaction and what their existing notions about sensitive subjects are. And I think, but typically, like to give an example, like we worked with an organization that was working internationally around reproductive care. And so it's essentially a sensitive subject in the sense that like we were in the United States, reproductive health is under threat, And so for us to essentially, we need to talk about, because it's their mission was international repro. Like that's what we have to, that's our mission, that's our mandate. We have to move that forward. So how do we connect the dots for people in the United States when it's like it's under their threat for them? So like really, we, like I said earlier, had to think about the existing cultural context of our problem. And so the way we landed was talking about how the United States needs to export its values and walk the walk. And so just because our values are under threat nationally does not mean that we don't stop exporting our true values all the time. And so I think that's really how we cut the thread of connecting to a sensitive subject and to an audience that might otherwise not exactly be receptive to that problem, but really trying to make it in a way that it's not about, we essentially said a threat to reproductive rights anywhere is a threat to reproductive rights everywhere. So it's like essentially that was essentially the drumbeat that we applied as we went through our messaging. But it does take, I would just say, perhaps, and Anna, maybe you can talk more specifically, but there's a lot of nuance involved in trying to sort of get to that message and really thoughtful conversations about your audience.
We didn't experience this specifically in this campaign, but what I would say, and to more sensitive subjects, is that we don't forget that we have all of these risk analysis, safeguards, things that have to also happen on the background of ensuring that we're doing things right and using our programmatic tools to actually know how we can address this also on the communication level. So yeah, you want to first know beforehand what you're trying to communicate and the results that you will have, and have the scenarios and intertwine this messaging to make it right within press conferences and be very do your background and information and research before putting this out on the public media. Would be my piece of advice.
Thanks both for your advices. We have another question from Vanessa Kadash. What would be your best recommendation for community engagement in conservation projects, as well as fundraising strategies in countries like Lebanon that are facing an unprecedented social, political, and economic crisis with a lack of effective governance? Who wants to start first?
Please, Dan, all yours.
Sure. Yeah, I think this is it's certainly tough. I think what sort of the typical advice would be, like, if I were to like compare the situation, I would think about it probably as if I was in a recession model economically, where I'm thinking to, for example, I would like want to renew all of my donors. I wouldn't care as much about how much they renewed for. I want them renewed. So I would like renew at a downgrade, and like ask for essentially, and like lower my bar of entry into my ask. I think the other thing to do, and we kind of touched on this, in a specific scenario like that, where like there's not a lot of trust in the institution, like the government, I feel like this is where UNDP specifically probably has an opportunity to like lean in with absolute legitimacy and transparency and trust as a large NGO. And so that's why I think, and Anna, you touched on this, and it's critically important to really think about like transparency, reporting back, and even because, and I think it's also important, and I don't think a lot of nonprofits do a great job of this, is like talking about losses, talking about when things don't go their way. That's an important part of the story. It's a setback, is what it is, right? And then you get to talk about your relentless fight against that. And it doesn't, you know, it doesn't matter how many doors are closed in your face, you're just going to keep going. So I think like that story is inspiring to people, and it's an important part of the narrative. So I think perhaps in that scenario, it's really talking about, I would come from a place of great ethical transparency, and then really sort of talk about, you know, talk about how this is affecting your work negatively and how it's a problem, and perhaps educating people about why it's a problem and like sort of like the specifics therein. And then critically, as I said at the top, kind of thinking about your audience, like really thinking about your audience in a way that's compassionate, really, right? Like to like, you know, you don't, when they're personally experiencing the issues that you're trying to help solve for, and they have their own limited capacity, you really got to just be essentially really sensitive to that. And I think that's really perhaps it's very complex and difficult to do, but that's probably you know, what's involved.
And if I can just add, beside the transparency and results, what I mentioned also and was the strategic partnerships, and in this case, the grassroots organizations that already have this confidence might be one way to ally with your broader initiative goals, and that you would already have on the ground partners to which have already this trust and to actually get there and deliver better.
Thank you. And I know it was a tough question. We have maybe like a couple of minutes for the last two questions. One of them is from Doreen Cassimi. Doreen is asking what was the donor reception for both projects? I
can say for we recommend cultivation for any like I would say for any single donor. Like I would say every organization should be engaging in dialogue, not monologue, dialogue with their donors on a regular basis. So that looks like different things. So like, for example, the quiz example I showed, that's dialogue, because there's a question and an answer. But that's obviously different than like a dialogue that you might be having with a corporate sponsorship, where it's like actually real conversation. So I think that is it's like an evergreen, I think, recommendation. I think the key pieces of that are like really thinking about when people are, so like that was a big part of the success of like really providing that like the current social cultural context around what you're talking about. Like you don't want to sound out of date, so you have to like talk about things in current relevancy. And then the other side of that, I feel was like it didn't necessarily work the same for every single audience as far as like what we were trying to accomplish. So like, for example, at World Food Program, we had monthly donors. We called them Zero Hunger Heroes. And we actually tested into a type of cultivation, but only for those giving higher than, I think it was like $40 per month. And so meaning like the higher level monthly donor, they liked it, and it increased their giving otherwise, their one-time giving. For the lower monthly donors, they didn't like it. They opted out, they unsubscribed. So we said, okay, great, let's not add that cultivation to that lower dollar group, because I think there's essentially our hypothesis at the time was that a person who's giving, let's say $20 a month, is happy to help our mission on a regular basis, but perhaps doesn't want to hear about it as much. That's fine. But perhaps the person who's giving $100 a month, who's like very invested essentially in the progress, not to say that they're more invested than the other person, but certainly invested enough that they're interested to hear more about what are the specifics of what you are doing on a regular basis. And so in other words, like doing what we were saying before about reporting back, wins and losses, personal narratives, technical narratives, like just they wanted more of that. And so that's what we gave them.
We had a very strong reception and also buy-in, and something that worked was that we also gave space to incorporate our donors, especially for the larger impact packages, both from embassies and corporate donors, to make with them a new campaign or adapt the campaign to with their own branding and needs. And like, for example, something that came out of the 6 embassies that joined the campaign was to, instead of having a corporate footprint, what we did were the friendship forests, and some donors actually made these like live educational purpose restoration fields and a biological corridor restoration project between the small patches of forest that we were reforestating. So they came in with all of these ideas, and there was space, and we gave them attention and interest so that they could also engage. And as I showed in some of the pictures, companies that also wanted to integrate the campaign within their own corporate social responsibility and environmental social responsibility program. So having this flexibility, but not leaving like the basic stuff or the basic things that from your initiative that you won't negotiate, such as our 5 years maintenance, our target beneficiaries, and the way that it was done and the transparency behind it. I think if you are flexible enough to engage with these ideas, it becomes even more richer, and collective storytelling is produced and delivered in a better way. It just enhances it, and it becomes something more than you even imagine. So that was a great way to engage these sponsors.
Thank you both. And now over to Wayne for the closing remarks.
Thank you all. We're out of time. You know, I thought we covered a lot of really great territory here. One of the things that I would have loved to get into a little bit more is about targeting strategies and audience strategies, because what we really kind of talked about is, you know, a lot of Dan's work is focusing on more how to reach the public, and more of Ana's work was talking about how to reach and engage traditional donors, private sector, and sort of, and those are they can be complementary strategies, but they're but knowing that we can't do it all, I just thought it was interesting. We didn't really have time to get into that. But I do want to remind everyone that's on the call that there are some great resources online on the UNDP intranet about how to develop audience strategies, and we can share that link in the chat. But as we close, I wanted to thank you all for joining, and thank our presenters, thank our organizers, and encourage you all to join future meetups. These sessions are informal, and we're going to host them every month. This will help expand our collective learning about digital fundraising. So please spread the word to your colleagues and invite them to join. And we hope to see you in the future. Thank you very much, everyone. And signing off now. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Hi, everyone.